So welcome. So Caregiving is, this is my favorite conference, and I'm going to give you a little quick background on myself. I'm an estate planning and elder law attorney in Belleville, Illinois, with my law partner, Nancy Larson. We have a small Muscuda office, if any of you are from there, but we primarily meet in Belleville. And gosh, I've been out of law school since 2000. I love what I do. The elder law part is my favorite part. So I was kind of a late in life baby for my father. My parents were 15 years apart, and I just mentioned my dad passed away from Alzheimer's. He's been gone 14 years. So my dad died when I was 29 years old. And it was a tough road, and now I have that enrichment to look back and share that time and understanding with families. Just yesterday I spoke with a client on the phone. Her husband was in the hospital, and so now we know we're going to transfer we can't bring him home this time. She's brought him home other times, and I understood the panic. And my paralegal said to me, well, how did you know that? I said, because I've been there with my own father. It is so difficult to be a caregiver, and I'm so proud of you all for coming to allow yourselves this day. This is a phenomenal organization, and all of the groups that support it, and hospice and St. John's and adult daycare, everybody here today loves what they do, including myself. But this is a great day for you to treat yourselves, to get some fantastic information for yourselves and your loved ones about being a caregiver. Because I always share with clients, especially the caregivers, when I'm sitting down with them trying to do some sort of either crisis planning or estate planning and trying to get some documents in place, I always say, now what about you? Oh, let's not worry about me. And then it's not uncommon for me to lose my caregivers. They'll pass away before the ill spouse. So just keep that in mind, because they don't take care of themselves. But yesterday a client called me and was panicked. I've got to find assisted living, I've got to find rehab. And I said, okay, wait, I think you're going to transfer from the hospital on some Medicare days. Lord knows we never know how long that's going to be. And then we'll figure out how we're going to private pay or how we're going to do that and what facility. But absolutely panic-stricken. It is Friday at 10 o'clock when she called me. And you know what happens Friday at 5 o'clock at a nursing home or an assisted living? Shift change, right? So that's exactly what happened to me when we finally placed my dad in a nursing home. My whole family got their panties in a wad, as I say. We all got riled up. We had some things happen. We had a crisis. We thought like that was the time. I flew home from law school. I went to put him in the nursing home. My parents are divorced, but thank God my mom helped me because my sisters went running the other direction. God love them. They all were too busy. And I stood there on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock trying to get him enrolled in a nursing home and admitted. That is the most difficult thing to do on a Friday afternoon. So I said to my client, and she said, well, his blood sugar's a little wonky. Maybe they're going to keep him. I'm like, beg them to keep him until Monday so that you can get your head in the game. We can get you with some people who can help you find the right facility, and you're not standing there. And there's nothing wrong with these facilities, but there's usually a big shift change from Monday to Friday, and then the weekend crew comes in. And they don't always have that conversation about who just got admitted, and what's going on. So being a caregiver is not just caring for your loved one, but also having the stress of going from point A to point B at a hospital or an assisted living or into rehab. And how are we going to pay for this? And so it's kind of like, in my opinion, at least I felt like that with my dad, you're kind of in crisis mode a lot. You kind of level out, things seem to be going good, and then another event happens. So you just reinvent the wheel every single time, because either their dementia has increased, or God forbid they've fallen and broken a hip or something else. So it's usually medical related. And then what happens with our caregivers is, because they're so focused on doing such a fantastic job with their loved one, they forget to take care of themselves. Right? And then, so that's why I'm really proud of you all for being here today. And I found this fact sheet with Alzheimer's that just published, and I thought it was completely something you all needed to hear and fascinating to me, because it is astounding, these numbers. Nearly half of caregivers or care contributors cut back on their own expenses to take care of a family member or a loved one with dementia. This is just caregivers caring for loved ones with dementia. So you cut back on your own expenses. 1 in 5 caregivers cut back on their own doctor visits and their own care responsibilities. Raise your hand if you're 1 of 5. See, there's got to be more hands. I know there is. Probably most of you. So you cancel your own doctor's appointments. You cancel your own dentist appointments, your own eye appointments, whatever it is, because they needed that slot that you had already made your appointment. Now you need to take your loved one to that appointment. So that's astounding to me. 1 in 5, and caregivers lose over $15,000 a year in income I think that's low, personally, in taking care of their loved ones. And so this is the one that really blew me out of the water. 15 million family and friends provided 18 billion unpaid caregiver hours in 2015. That was 1 year. 15 million people provided 18 billion caregiver hours that were unpaid. That's unbelievable to me. So that tells me, while we all know that assisted livings and nursing homes are busting at the seams and they're growing and they're building nonstop, everybody is still trying desperately to keep their loved ones at home. Right? And then that's when, out of those 15 million family and friends, I can't imagine how many of them are conking out themselves. They're ignoring their own health, their own body talking to them saying, I'm worn out, you need to get to the doctor, you need this, you need that. They're ignoring their own care to take care of their loved one who is even more in need. So, and I think what I find from my clients is that you just can't, we all promise our loved one, I promise I'll never put you in a nursing home. I promise I'll never put you in an assisted living. And obviously the stats say, staying at home, that's where everybody wants to be, you get the best care, but there's also a lot of stress that comes with that. And there comes a point when you can no longer physically, let's not even get into the mental, but physically you can no longer pick up that individual because they have fallen and broken a hip. You can't transfer them from the chair to the bed. You can't get them out of bed. And so those are the things you kind of got to keep in your mind. And with my dad, so my parents were divorced, but still great friends, thank goodness. And he had a lady friend for years. But for my dad, it became, she was still working. She was a nurse, and she couldn't leave him at home any longer. He put the metal coffee pot in the microwave and blew it up and caught it on fire. He would tootle around town. He had a path, but then one day his path changed. Whatever changed in his brain caused him to get lost. Thank goodness with the car deal, everybody's got I had the conversation with the client 2 weeks ago. The kids brought him in. They kind of brought up the car, and I could tell it was a touchy subject, so I said, let's have the talk. I'll have the talk with you. I don't have to go home with him tonight and sit with him at dinner. I mean, he's my client, but I'm happy to have the talk. And I pulled the kids aside. With my dad, by the grace of God, his car got stolen. And they found it like a couple weeks later, completely burned out, and he was so excited that he got the insurance check. He'd already long forgotten about the car, and he'd gotten the money, and he was like, look at the check I got. But, okay, I'm not saying go steal the car. I'm saying by grace of God that worked for us. But, we were talking about pulling the spark plugs. And, but you still have some if they can drive, they just shouldn't be driving. You have some pretty savvy people who can put those spark plugs back together and kind of piece the main parts back together. So I don't go steal their car. But, it could just move and be parked someplace else. But that's hard. I spoke with a woman last week that said her husband is 58 years old in an assisted living, frontal lobe dementia. And she doesn't expect him to live much longer. 58 years old. That one just completely blew me out of the water. And they're on their tail end of their journey. And so I think the journey started at least 3 or 4 years ago. And so, but we were talking about the driving, and she hid the keys, and she hid him, and then he found him. And then she finally, found a really good hiding place. And then finally he let that go. But it was, it was a difficult 3 weeks, which means it's stressful on you. It's stressful on hiding the keys. It's stressful that you're dealing with them mad because they can't find him and they want to drive. So I don't know how many of you are going through the driving issue, but there are just constant, it's just like, it's kind of like you're playing dodgeball all the time. It's constantly dodging the next issue, and how do we get to that next step? So being here today and reaching out to these community resources is a great, fantastic first step, but stay in touch with these resources because they're all fantastic. So my job this morning is to kind of give you some legal information, an overview on basics of estate planning and some of the benefits out there that certainly our office works with on a regular basis. And so raise your hand if anybody in this room has their own personal power of attorney. Do you know what a power of attorney? You have them. Okay, that's a pretty good number, good. The rest of you need them. I always say this, once you're 18, you need a power of attorney. And so that's what I give my nieces and nephews or my cousins for their birthdays. It's not really exciting, but that's what we do. Because my family's a little bit of control freaks. We like to still stay in control of your life even if you turned 18. Obviously, most of them are in college, and you don't necessarily need those. But HIPAA causes that you can't call and get your kids' college information. You can't, access their bank account if they get sick. You can't do those sorts of things. So it's important for everybody to have a power of attorney. So they're called advanced directives because we sign them while we're competent, and we're saying, this is how I want my affairs to be handled. This is my advanced directive. Always appoint somebody that you trust, that also is competent at the time, that you trust will make the medical decisions that you want made for you if it's a healthcare power of attorney, or financial decisions if it's a property power of attorney. On the medical power of attorney, there's been several changes over the last few years. The Illinois State Legislature has been busy doing that. Unfortunately, they haven't passed a budget yet, but they've been busy making changes to the healthcare power of attorney. Some of the big changes, there's some HIPAA provisions in there which are good for all of us, but there's also provisions, a healthcare power of attorney allows you at end of life to say, it's the whole pull the plug. Everybody says, is this the pull the plug provision? Sort of, but it's that in the event you can't make those decisions, then I trust this individual to either have those conversations with my physician and weigh the burdens and the benefits of the treatment, or some people can choose, I don't want any life-sustaining treatment. I want life-sustaining treatment unless I'm in an irreversible coma, determined by a physician. And then the last option, a healthcare power of attorney, says, keep me alive at all costs on machines. I kind of equate that to the Terry Schiavo situation, the lady in Missouri who was on machines for years. And so I've only had one client ever choose that. And we spent like an hour talking about it. I'm like, are you sure this is what you want? But most of us choose the first or second one, because we trust our agent. You shouldn't be appointing somebody if you don't trust them to make those decisions. And then on a financial power of attorney, same thing. You have to trust that agent to handle your financial affairs if you can't, to pay your bills if you're sick or you're in a crisis and that sort of thing. So it's important to have those documents in place. If you don't have those documents in place, then we need a guardianship if you become incapacitated. So that's kind of where when I say we start to hit crisis mode, I think caregiving is kind of where we should really make sure if we're caring for a loved one, they need that much care and attention, you should be making sure you get those documents in place immediately. Okay, so because you have to have capacity to sign those documents, you have to know what's going on and make sure that they make the best decisions with those appointments of an agent. So if not, you unfortunately then are stuck with, if there's a crisis and somebody has a stroke and they've never put those documents in place, then you're stuck with looking at going to court. It's not the end of the world, it's just an extra expense. And we're already kind of in crisis mode because something has happened. So you have to add another layer on, and that's kind of unfortunate. A guardianship is when you go to court and you ask the court to appoint a guardian to handle your affairs. Now you have to air all of your dirty laundry. You have to air all your laundry in court. You list all of their assets. You have to report to the court every year on how you spend those. It's good to keep people in line because the court wants to make sure that money there isn't financial abuse going on and those sorts of things. But it's just an extra layer that if you've gotten those powers of attorney in place, you can sort of avoid. And afterwards, I have worksheets up here just kind of giving you general summaries of what's a guardianship, what are powers of attorney for healthcare and finance. So know that they're all up here and you can grab these or we can pass them out later. But I just kind of want you to know if you don't plan, a guardianship is where we have to turn to. And it helps if we need it. Sometimes we have to get a guardianship even when there's a power of attorney in place, because if you ever see on the news, you know, 2 guys went to Oklahoma, they left Belleville area and they drove to Oklahoma and they got lost. So they were competent, or maybe not competent, they were able-bodied enough to drive, but they got confused and got lost. And so usually those are our clients. Nancy and I end up calling each other and saying, is that your client? No, I think that's my client. Yeah, I think so too. So then the next thing you know, the phone rings from the family, right? So unfortunately, those are situations where even when there's a power of attorney in place, you may have to get a guardianship, because a guardianship from the court has a lot more teeth to it in order to hold an individual in a nursing facility or a skilled nursing or that sort of thing. So I only give you that example because a lot of times people will say, well, I have a power of attorney, but Dad keeps walking out the door. Well, that's because we don't have any, if he's not going to stay, we don't have any teeth to necessarily keep him there, or if it's not a lockdown facility. So sometimes we get into those tricky waters, but not often. But I do want you to know that, because it usually is with the dementia, or something related type of client, because of the mental health issues and just kind of the ebb and flow of how that disease works. So powers of attorney. Any questions on powers of attorney? I should use a microphone more often. You guys are super quiet. When I use and I speak out loud without the microphone, usually you guys are firing questions at me. Okay, other basic estate planning we're going to zoom through. Last will and testament. Everybody should have a last will and testament. Clients say to me, why? Well, first of all, you want to tell people, this is how I want my affairs to be handled. This is how I want them to be divided up at the end of the day. If there's $10, little Johnny and little Susie each get 5. So it's important to have that, and they'll say, why? I have everything on my, I got my kids on my bank account. I've made them POD, payable upon death, or I've appointed them as beneficiaries on my CDs, my assets, that sort of thing. That's great, but you just never know. Very often, even with my clients that I think I have shored up and helped tighten up their estate planning, there's those like insurance policies your parents bought for you when you were kids, Gerber, I have one, those little bitty policies that you took out from your first job, or it could have been your only job. There's pension insurance out there. There's all kinds of little bitty policies and things like that. And so those are important to make sure you have a last will and testament to say, in the event that there's not something on an asset at the end of the day. I think my microphone went off. It did. Can you hear me? In the event that you didn't name somebody or you have questions on an estate, then at least the last will and testament will direct your executor on how to handle everything. So it's good to have a last will and testament, even if it's simple. It's not a bad thing. And then another question I get, I don't think it's still working. Is it working now? Another question I get is revocable living trust. Why do we do a trust? We do a trust primarily for avoidance of probate. Has anybody in this room gone through probate with any of their family? It's fun times, right? So not always. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I've had a client where I could have done a trust and put his home in trust after his spouse passed away, because the things that trigger probate are real estate just in the decedent's name, or assets that didn't have a beneficiary on them or weren't joint with somebody that total over $100,000. Which is why you hear a lot of people say, oh, I put my kids on that. I made them the beneficiaries or whatever. But a revocable living trust helps us avoid probate primarily. There are other reasons. My firm also does. We do a lot of special needs planning. And so for disabled adult children, for maybe grandchildren with Down syndrome or some sort of autism, whatever that disability is, we want to be able to make sure that they inherit, but we don't want them to lose any government benefits they might be receiving. That would be means tested. And means tested means that child or that adult can't have more than $2,000 in their name, perhaps, for Medicaid purposes or for Social Security. But there's some fine lines in there. A lot of people get Social Security disability, but they also tap into the Medicaid system. So you have to really sit down with an attorney who understands those benefits and the difference between the Social Security and the SSI and the Medicaid. But I digress. So we do revocable living trusts for several reasons, but I just kind of want you to be, in general, understand why we do them. We do them to avoid probate. We also do them to help avoid a contest if we think there's going to be a lot of fighting. I had a gentleman once, it was a perfect time to do the trust. His wife had passed away. He owned the real estate and some stuff in just his name, and he had like 8 kids. And he said, no, I want to do a will. And I said, but this is a great time. We can kind of help simplify it at the end of the day. And he said, oh no, my kids are going to fight, and I want you to be in the middle of it. I said, great. So, okay, so, and one by one, off and on through the year, he brought each child in to meet me, which was really it worked. He passed away a couple years later. We knock on wood, well, the estate's closed now. I didn't have any fighting. I think he brought them in by the back of their hair and, in the neck and introduced them to me. And so through the years, I got to know them all. I got to know the ones who'd borrowed a bunch of money and that was in the will because they had to pay that back or whatever. I kind of got to know all of them. And he actually, his technique worked. I usually say, well, let's do a trust so we can stay out of court and not battle all of this. And he said, no, they're going to need it. And they ended up not fighting, which I'm sure would have made him very happy. But it was kind of nice because they all understood the process. He was up front with every single one of them. Hey, little Susie, you've got $25,000 I gave you to purchase a house. You have to pay that back to your brothers and sisters. I mean, every one of them had a loan except the one executor. The one son had never borrowed any money. But it was good because they all knew what the other one owed. And they all knew that he had leveled the playing field, really, which was helpful and avoided fights at the end of the day. Because that's the stuff you hear. You never hear about the easy probates or the easy trust administration. You hear about the people fighting over the ceramic Christmas things with those little lights in it. That's what people fight over. And I can tell you, if we go in front of a judge, the judge is going to say, for the love of God, sell it all in a garage sale, and each of you get your 50 cents from the box. That's what the judge is going to say. They're not going to sit there and cut. It's just like a divorce. I used to do family law. They'd fight over the Christmas decorations, or they'd fight over the rugs. He's like, cut it down the middle. I don't care. But we're not going to sit here and fight over this ridiculousness, because to a court, those personal things, which usually are the things that get everybody wound up, are invaluable. And so, because they're more of attachments for individuals. And so we try to avoid those things at the end of the day. And kids, it's funny what people get wound up about. I had a family who, there was 6 or 7 kids, and mom's still alive, but she had brought in to me a typed list, single-spaced, of 10 pages. And she had inventoried her entire house from top to bottom. Lamps, sheets, bedding, beds, chairs, and I thought, oh my God. So I, of course, just referenced, please see the attached list, because I thought, surely this list is going to change. And those kids all agreed on everything but one thing. It was the candy dish. It was a little crystal, wasn't like it was fancy crystal, it was candy dish. And you know why it was so important? It was important because Dad came home every night from work, pulled his change out of it, and put it in the candy dish. After dinner, they scooped up whatever change there was, and they ran across the street to the dime store to get candy. That, to them, was the coolest memory. So, really great family, except I thought they were a little nutty when they got crazy over the candy dish until I understood. And so, you know what we did? When Mom does pass away, we're going to start, I think we're either going to draw straws or start with the oldest. They have huge family gatherings, and so they will share the candy dish each year. One child will keep it for the year, and they will just round robin. Because for them, that was the only way I could get them to settle on everything. And I know that sounds silly, but that was their big sticking point. And I thought, well, maybe it's expensive. And they're like, nah, it was the memory that went with it. So I just said to all of them, God, don't be the kid that breaks the candy dish when you're transferring it, because that would be me, right? I would be the one that, while I was taking it to my sister's house for Christmas, it's your year to keep it, I would end up cracking it and breaking it. So we kind of tease about that, but that was their big thing. So it's about being reasonable, but it's also about treating your loved ones. Try to keep your kids. Most people want to treat their kids fairly, or they completely cut them out, and you can do that too. But it's really just about getting your thoughts in order, and I can tell you it's a gift to the family. When my dad passed away, I have an older half-sister and then an older sister. So and you think that you're going to be reasonable. When somebody passes away, you're not. You do silly things, and I, for one, am one of those people that I thought, well, I will never act like that, and I did. I totally did. I kind of erred on the side of overwhelming grief, so when I was at my father's casket saying my final goodbyes, I really, truly lost. I couldn't stop sobbing. My legs were shaking, and I was kind of doing the weeble wobble, and everybody thought for sure I was going to pass out. Because for me, I just was trying to process everything. But my other sisters were fighting over who's the last one going to see him before he closed the casket. I mean, you just do the most ridiculous things. And so just keep those things in mind, that if you can cut that crap out in advance by telling your kids, this is how I want to be handled, and tell them, I want to be cremated, and then the kids will say, well, I'm not going to cremate her. Well, that's what she wrote in her document. You better, because that's what we wanted her to do. That's what she wants. So you make sure you pick somebody who's also going to honor your wishes. Because some kids will say, Mom, don't donate your organs. Let her donate them if she wants to donate them. They're her organs, not yours. What are you going to do with them? Put them on a shelf in a pickle jar? Seriously, when you ask them that, they're like, well, no. Well, then what are you going to do with them? It's not your body to give. And so you really have to pick somebody who's going to honor your wishes, but who's also going to behave at the end of the day. And I'm not saying my sisters and I didn't behave, but we each had a different relationship with my dad because of the years apart we were and the different stages of his life that he had us in. So for me, he was kind of more like a grandpa. I mean, he was always there for me, but he never had to do the hard stuff with me. My mom raised me and was really the disciplinarian. And I love him for that. I still love him just as much, but we had different stages, and that came out at the end of the day. And that's going to happen with big families too, because there's such a span in age. And so just know that anything you can do yourselves or help your loved one that you're caring for get their affairs in order now is a gift to everyone, which also includes prepaying the funeral, right? Because you'd be amazed. I mean, before the family comes in first to view the body before the rest of it's open to the public, we stood there, and finally the funeral director's like, you have to make a decision. My sister was a beautician, so she was brushing his hair to the right. My other sister was brushing it to the left. I, of course, was ready to pass out because they were touching a dead body. So, because I was 29, remember? I was like, oh, yeah, stop touching him. So I was kind of having that moment, and they were just much more personal with him. And it's like, put the pin on the right. No, put the ring on. I was like, the people are waiting for us to come. And the funeral home's like, for God's sakes. And one of us wanted the casket open, one of us didn't. And thankfully, my dad, my mom, and his lady friend stepped in and were like, okay, this is what he wanted. Now stop it. Because we were putting ourselves in front of that. And so you have to be able to honor somebody's wishes. My dad was a Marine. And so any veterans in here? Spouses of veterans, thank you so much for your service. That's my favorite area to practice in. Besides my special needs kids, they're pretty cool too. But so he was a Marine. He was just like a sergeant. I mean, he was just, I don't think he ever got out of first class or whatever. He was in World War II. He played the bugle in the Marine Corps. He went to Guam. I've got cool pictures of him in Guam. But we fought over the flag, because there was no spouse. So the oldest was like, well, I get the flag. And of course I was like, well, I want the flag. And my sister wanted a flag. So we had 3 flags on his casket. not only did we want a flag, so they said, well, we'll buy you a flag. I said, I don't want you to buy me a flag. That doesn't mean anything. I want it on the casket. So we had that, because to all of us, the one thing he could remember with the Alzheimer's, the one thing he consistently talked about was being a Marine. So for the three of us girls, that was our last memory to hold on to. That was the thing. You know, the whole I walked up to school, I walked uphill 5 miles each day in the snow to go to school story. So that was my dad. I walked across the JB Bridge when I was 17. I didn't tell my mom I signed up as a Marine, and I joined the Marine Corps. You know, that's how proud he was to be an American and how proud he was to serve his country. So that story was why we were all so attached. It was important. So they were like, for God's sakes, give him 3 flags. You know, they give you one for free. They just didn't want us to fight anymore. They put 3 flags on the casket, and people were like, oh, you look like a 5-star general, you know? And so they were like, I didn't know your dad was like a life Corps. Oh, no, he wasn't a life Marine. He was in for 3 or 4 years, that was it. But for us, it was important, you know, and sometimes you just have to get through those moments. But thank goodness he had prepaid his burial, which is something else you should be considering for your loved one and yourselves. It is a gift to everyone, because if we couldn't agree on which side of the hair was going to be parted or where the pin was going to be on his jacket, Lord knows we would have never gotten a casket picked out. I mean, really. So thankfully, I had helped my dad get that taken care of. I let him pick it out because I was still young, and that was several years before he passed away. Why do they have to put caskets in the basement of funeral homes? Why in the basement? So when by the time I got down the steps, my knee pits were sweating, and I'm like, this is like a bad, scary movie. I'm out. So I just kind of stood up and waited in the foyer of the funeral home until they picked out the casket. Now, my dad was pretty funny in the dementia at that point, so he thought it was a hoot. This is so fun. And I was kind of like, this is freaking me out, Dad. There's probably dead people somewhere in this funeral home right now, and I'm standing here by myself, and you're like having a great time picking out like caskets. Because to him, it was kind of funny. He was in that funny stage. And he actually stayed pretty funny, except that, when every now and then somebody tick him off, and he'd kind of show a little bit of anger, which then worries you with your loved one if you have them in a facility, because if they start to get, pushy and crabby and not nice to other people, then you're starting to run out of options on where to place them. So thankfully he stayed pretty nice. But, I share these stories with you because they're real. You need to get your affairs in order for your loved ones, but you need to get your loved one that you're caring for, their affairs in order as soon as possible, especially the burial. Because if not at the end of the day, who's going to be stuck paying for it? I'm pretty sure I'm looking at it. If you care this much to be here to care for them, you're going to be the one stuck paying for it, right? Because it's out of respect, out of love, whatever, you're going to do it. I talked to a family this week, and the guy, they're 55, and they're just getting ready to retire, and he said something about, well, my only debt is he's still paying off his brother's funeral. And I was like, what? And he said, oh, I've lost all 4 of my siblings. I paid for each one of their funerals. I mean, like they did, there was not a lot of funds in the family. And so this guy is on funeral number 4 for siblings. Because, either they had children that couldn't afford it or what have you. And so you don't want to be in that spot. And that was very good of him to do that and very kind. But he's making payments. He's like, I feel like I'm making college payments, only it's been on burying my siblings. So keep that in mind, not to focus on that anymore. Usually, any questions? Yes. I'm very sorry. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Do they have an attorney? Okay, so nobody has an attorney. Is there a will? Okay. Is everybody's name on a life estate? Do you guys know what? This is a deed question. This is a great question, though. This comes up in Medicaid issues, but also comes up at end of life when somebody passes away. So mom just passed away recently. She lived in the home 5 years, probably as a caregiver. Yeah, so she was the caregiver. And the other siblings, how many siblings? Good time. So there's 4 of you on a deed. This is why I don't put that many kids on a deed. It's a great when you're talking about life estates, but you got to get 4 kids to now say, this lady's got to get out of the house and she's got 4 months to do it. She's lived there for the last 5 years and cared for mom. So it's like, hey, thanks. Out the door you go. Thanks for taking care of mom. That's my opinion. I mean, I don't really know. But it's really difficult. And so I usually build that into a will or a trust. So-and-so is living in the home, even if it's a second marriage, and I do a lot of prenups for my 80-year-olds, just so you know, because they're trying to protect the assets they had that they built for the last 30 or 40 years with that prior spouse. And they remarry. I try to tell my 80-year-olds not to remarry. They don't want to live in sin. They think it's sinful. I just say, nobody needs to know. Put a ring on. Nobody needs to know. Because of what I'm going to talk about in it later with Medicaid. But a life estate is when, you know, a mom or a dad says, I'm going to give you my house for kids. I'm going to put your name on my house for kids. Oh. And then, which adds 4 kids' liabilities, by the way, to your house. And then, but I'm going to live in it for life. So she gets a life estate. At death, the life estate extinguishes, and these 4 children now own it outright, together. They got to sell it together. They got to agree on the price together. They got to agree on how it's going to pay the four utility bills 4 ways, real estate bills 4 ways. Nightmare. No offense. So you're paying for all the bills, which is fair because you'd be paying rent or mortgage somewhere. So, you know, that's something you might want to talk to an attorney about, but it's not unreasonable at some point to say, we need you to vacate the home because... Now, I always say the flip side of that is there's always, no offense to you boys, but I had a run on probate estates where the youngest brother never really left home. He left, but he came back and he never left. So it was always trying to get the younger brother out of mom's house, right? And so, because they never really got a job, they were the baby Jesus of the family, I call him. The baby, could do no wrong, never left mom's house or dad's. And so, not saying you're the baby, you came back to care for mom. But the oldest. But it's difficult because you're starting to get into murky waters, and I can certainly talk about it later. But yeah, at some point you're going to have to say, I tell people, at least the baby's living in the house and it's not empty, because insurance companies don't love empty homes. You know, that's not their favorite thing to do. So there's a plus there, and you're paying the utilities. But at the same time, you guys are going to have to come to, you know, you're going to have a come to Jesus meeting with the other 3 SIBs. Yeah, and I think it wouldn't hurt to get an attorney involved just to make it, you know, let's all sing Kumbaya and get back on the same page. That's a great question, though. Yes? If you have a trust, do you still need a will? Yes. Yes. A revocable living trust means you're still in control. So I could do the Heidi Dodd revocable living trust. I put my house in trust. I put my bank accounts in trust. Maybe I name my insurance or something like that. So if both my husband and I die, everything flows through that trust to my child. But I still need a last will and testament. It's called a pour-over will. Very simple. It just says, I, Heidi Dodd, if I forgot something, I forgot to put it in trust, or I forgot to put a name of somebody else on it, then at the end of the day, I want you to take it from my will and pour it into my trust. So yes, you should still do a last will and testament. Great question. Great question. A pour-over will. But that's only when you're doing a trust. You should always have a last will and testament. And it can be simple. But please don't go to LegalZoom.com. Just recently, in the last 6 months, had a family. Dad owns a ton of rental properties. He's probably worth about $2 million in real estate and rental properties, let alone the cash. Second marriage, lots of kids. He went to LegalZoom.com. He forgot to fill in everything in the will. So the will I was shown said, my spouse gets 0.066. I'm pretty sure that was probably 66%. You know, like she's going to get some chunk. 0.066. And then he forgot to name all of the other kids. So the only part of his estate that's being distributed is 0.066 of a $2 million in real estate. What the heck? So I can tell you, every kid, the wife, everyone has lawyered up. We now have 4 lawyers. They asked me to get in. I said, it was nice meeting you. It wasn't my client to begin with. I was doing something else for one of the family members, but I said, and unfortunately, they do need to all lawyer up. But then you have to turn to the statute. If you don't do a will, the statute says, it goes to my spouse and my kids, right, equally. So if you die and you didn't ever do anything or name your spouse or do any of that, then it's your spouse and your children line up on the same page, and they're all treated equally. So if you have a spouse and 2 kids, they're each going to take a third. The statute tells us what to do. So if you don't want the statute to tell you how to divvy up your stuff at the end of the day, then you better get a will in place. So what I really want to spend most of my time, any other questions on just basic estate planning? No? Good. Okay. So usually the hot topic, and maybe it will change this year, is talking about benefits, like what's out there to help my loved one pay for care. Well, first of all, the first person you turn to pay for care is yourself, or your loved one's money. So when I'm coming from the state of Illinois' perspective, or how you pay for care, on the continuum, number 1 is ourselves. We have to pay for it. And we either pay for it out of our pension, our Social Security, our income coming in, or whatever assets are sitting in our bank account, right? So do we have CDs? Do we have IRAs? Do we have 401ks? Do we have annuities? Whatever it is, that's all an available asset. And now for the state of Illinois, so is your house, depending on if you're the only person living in it and you move to a nursing home. So first person to pay for care is ourselves. or our spouse, because there's a joint responsibility there, for better or for worse, right? Till death do us part. And then secondly is, do you have long-term care insurance? Anybody in this room have long-term care insurance? Get it. If you can get it, get it. It is a gift. If you can't get it, it is what it is. But if you can get it, or you can have that conversation, it's worth looking into. I tell this to my 40-year-olds, my 50-year-olds, my 60-year-olds. There hits a point where we start to say it's not economically feasible, or you can't get it because you have some sort of health condition that, because you do have to be underwritten. I don't sell long-term care insurance. I've just heard the spiel so much I could practically tell you if you can get it or not. But think about it. It's worth looking into. It's absolutely worth looking into, because it helps supplement the money that you have, your income, your assets, to pay for your care. And so I always kind of tease my mom that, there's lovely facilities out there, but there's this big, the Shrine is so expensive, right? It's actually pretty competitive, I think, but I always used to tease her, well, I'll drop you off at the Shrine, and we'll drive you in with your Cadillac, so you think everything's great. And when we run out of money, I'll pick you up in the pickup truck that Dad left behind, and then we'll take you, I'll take you someplace else. I kind of tease her, but because she's like, well, what if I run out of money? Well, then you have to move. You have to think these things through. And that's part of what our office does is, we try to do an analysis financially of where's everything at right now, and how do we get from point A to point B. But that's the kind of stuff that you need to think about. Long-term care insurance does help. So that's the second rung on the ladder. You pay, then long-term care insurance, right? And so next is, really the state of Illinois is the payer of last resort. That's when you've run out of money and you're in a skilled nursing facility. Some assisted living facilities in the area will take Medicaid, and that's Medicaid. Right before Medicaid is what I typically look at for veterans or their spouses of a wartime veteran, is there's a VA benefit out there called aid and attendance. I don't know all the VA benefits. I just happen to know a little bit about this one. Yes. Aid and attendance. AID and attendance. And so oftentimes if we have some veterans, we try to look at, can we turn on some care or some funds to help pay for their care? This benefit is looking to help veterans or their spouses who served during wartime, one day, 90 days active duty, one day during a wartime period. We've got some funky Vietnam dates that don't always settle well, but this sheet right here, all of you are going to want. This is kind of the breakdown of the VA benefit, the wartime periods. You got to find your loved one's DD-214, which you should have your hands on anyway, so when they pass away, you can at least do the proper, the veterans burial, that sort of thing. But the veterans benefit that I'm going to talk about, aid and attendance, it has some restrictions. Currently, it's kind of a crazy benefit. You can kind of, if you have, they're looking at assets and they're looking at income. But they're also looking at, before you get to that, you have to need help. You can't just turn on the benefit to get extra money because everybody would be getting it. So they're looking at, do you need assistance with activities of daily living? And their definition of activities of daily living is bathing or grooming, getting dressed, like you've got a bum shoulder and you just can't quite flip that sleeve around and get dressed in the morning. So bathing or grooming, getting dressed, getting in and out of a chair, or transferring from the bed to a chair, and using the toilet, or also feeding. But that's more like, actually, can you get the fork from the food to your mouth, sort of thing. It doesn't mean cooking. It's not medication reminders, which we're all probably doing if you're in this room, and it's not meal, right? Those two things they don't consider activities of daily living. We all need them to continue to get through the activities of daily living, but it's not those two requirements. So it's important that you know that. And it's a benefit that then they look at your assets. In general, they don't give us this magic number. Medicaid gives us the magic number. In general, VA says a married couple, if one of them needs the care, cannot have more than $80,000. I usually take that a little lower because I'm a little more conservative. I don't want to thumb my nose at the VA and go, we have $79,900. Can we apply for the benefit? But they also look at your age. If you're 90, you're both 90, they're going to think 80,000 is probably a little too high in my opinion, that you maybe need a little less. But in general, it's no more than 80,000. And in general, for a single person applying, whether it's the veteran or their spouse who would need the care, if the veteran has predeceased, it's no more than around $40,000. And then they do this fancy equation. I hate math, but no, they look at all of your income coming in and the costs that you're paying out each month. That's called unreimbursed medical in the VA world. And they're kind of, in general, looking at, hey, between your Social Security and your husband's pension, whatever else coming in, you're bringing in around $2,300 a month. However, you want to move into an assisted living and it costs $2,700 a month. Okay, you're upside down in costs. And an assisted living triggers because it's an unreimbursed medical in their mind, because you're getting assistance with activities of daily living. And so that's kind of the general, I don't want to bore you anymore because I think I'm losing all of you. Everybody looks sleepy. But that's kind of the general concept that you need to know about. It's not a given benefit. You have to apply. You go to your local office. You sit down with them, and your house is an exempt asset. But this is where people get in trouble, and when they end up calling me is, hey, I got mom on the benefit. We moved her into assisted living. We got her the benefit. If it's a surviving spouse of a wartime veteran, it's $1,149 a month. You can get up to. That's what usually helps people stay in those assisted livings combined with their Social Security and that sort of thing. For the veteran themselves, it's $2,085, up to $2,085 a month. So all of that's on this sheet, but it's kind of a great benefit if we can really trigger it. However, the VA, here's the kicker right now, the VA has pending rules. They are trying to come in line with the Medicaid rules. So, I was here this time last year and saying the VA just published the rules. We don't know when they're going to go into effect. I'm here now a year later saying we're still waiting to see if they're going to put these rules in effect. There was like over 800 comments filed in the Federal Register. You know how a bill becomes a law. They skipped the whole, let's go through legislation. They tried that and it never passed. So they skipped all of that and they went straight to rule making. And so all of us attorneys are saying, you can't do that. You can't just skip a major step. I think it was because it wasn't really politically great to be slapping down on the veterans. It's never a good move, right? Seniors, veterans, that sort of thing, the disabled community. So we don't know if they're going to go into play. The chatter that I've heard, and it's just chatter, is that they're going to put these rules into effect early summer. So we could very well. And the rule that's important for you to really understand is currently there's no look back on the transfer of assets to apply for the VA benefit. They don't ask you, have you given your house away? Have you gifted money away to anybody for less than fair market value? Because, some people do try to completely impoverish themselves to get on a benefit. They don't ask that question, which is crazy, but they don't. So they don't ask that question right now. They're getting ready to ask that question, and they're going to look for the next 3 years of documents to say, have you gifted or transferred any assets for less than fair market value? And then you'll have to, you can't commit fraud. You have to say yes or no, and then they'll go from there and whether they're not going to award you the benefit. Currently, there's no look back on those assets and those transfers. But when you talk about Medicaid, the payer of last resort, so that's the last rung on my continuum, that's when we talk about impoverishing, right? So you're down to, if you're a single person, you can only have $2,000. You can have a prepaid burial. You can have $2,000. They say a house and a car, but not really. The car, some kids will keep a car because maybe mom's car was handicap accessible and you can transfer them in and out of the nursing home easier and get them to the doctor's appointments, because typically the family, if they're still involved, are still taking them to the doctor's appointments and doing those sorts of things. So single person, basically you're down to $2,000 in a prepaid burial. And you can no longer just keep the house and let it sit empty. You have to put it up for sale. So if you have a $100,000 house and you get onto Medicaid, once the house sells, they're going to bump you off until you run through that money and get back down to $2,000. If there's no spouse, a single person, okay? Yeah, so that's kind of important to know. If you're married on Medicaid, and this is all in this sheet right here, Illinois Medicaid facts. This is just good for numbers. All the numbers are down here. If you're married and you need to place your spouse in the nursing home, you, as the community spouse, the healthy spouse in the community, you can keep $109,000. $109,560 is the magic number. I just round up to 109 or round down. So you can keep $109,000. Your house is protected, which is a blessing. It's a huge blessing because the state made a bunch of big changes recently, and that's at least the house is still protected for the community spouse. And you can keep a car, and your institutionalized spouse, which I hate that word, but the spouse that goes into the nursing home, they can only have no more than $2,000 in their name personally. But really, we just keep it all in the community spouse's name. So you have to spend down, but you can have the prepaid burial, which is why I'm saying earlier, prepay your burial, because you're allowed to do that. And for Medicaid purposes, and really just in general, make it irrevocable. So when you go to your local funeral home, say, I need a prepaid, irrevocable burial, and it needs to be Medicaid compliant. 99% of them are going to know. Some of my teeny tiny small towns I've never heard of don't quite know because they don't have the mass the mass individuals coming through their funeral home. But in general, you just need an irrevocable prepaid burial. That's why I'm pushing it now, so that at the end of the day, if you're applying for Medicaid for your loved one, you're not also running out at the last minute to try to prepay burial, because there's enough going on in your lives right now to not have to sit at a funeral home, and then your knees pit sweat, and then you end up in the basement trying to pick out a casket. So yeah, it's not my favorite place to be. I don't know why they're always in the basement. So anyways, know that. But that's what's important on Medicaid, and know that there are services out there to kind of help you through that. My office kind of works through that analysis. But this is when you get down, VA is like this and Medicaid is like this. This is a numbers game. Do you have long-term care insurance to help pay? That helps. One of our paralegals right now is out of town in Peoria with her mother, who is now looking at assisted living. She called me this week, and she said, oh, I really should have paid more attention when you do the VA stuff and the Medicaid stuff, because that's not what she works on our firm on a regular basis. We thought we were going to get her the VA benefit and help her mom get that extra $1,100 a month to pay for the assisted living, because she's very low income. She's got like $3,000 in her account, and she's got about, I don't know, $1,800 a month coming in between the Social Security and Dad's pension. And so actually, the VA benefit was going to it still wasn't going to keep her afloat, in this facility. And so I said, you need to look at a supported living facility. It's assisted living, but the state of Illinois has gotten wise in the last, 8 to 10 years. I actually used to be in-house with the Department on Aging in Illinois, so it's been even longer than that, 15, 20 years they've done the supported living facility. It's assisted living, but they accept Medicaid. Right? Because the state does realize it is better to keep people in their home via the CCP program, which St. John's runs, right? The community care program and Age Smart. It's better to keep those people in their homes and provide the services in their homes as caregivers to help the family still be able to go to work but keep tabs on their loved one and do those sorts of things. It's cheaper to do that than it is to place them in an assisted living, but it's also cheaper to keep them in an assisted living than to just place them in a nursing home when they don't need skilled nursing home. They need just some assistance, but they're low income, but they do need that. So the state is getting savvy and wise to that. We have several supported living facilities in the area. I always think of, most of them are called Cambridge House, but Nancy, is Cedarhurst also? No.
Knollwood in
Knollwood.
Caseyville.
Thank you. So I know, there's several. So know that in your area, in this area, we have several to choose from, which is a good thing, because it's kind of this pilot program with the state that's never gone away, which is a good thing too. But know that Medicaid won't pay for a caregiver in your home in the sense of like skilled nursing. You have to be in a nursing home for that. Medicaid through the community care program and that sort of thing will pay for some caregiver and assistance, although the state's not paying for anything right now, as Nancy and I just talked about the logjam. But up in Springfield. But know that in general, also the difference between VA and Medicaid in general is that you can pay a loved one for care in your home, a sibling, a child, that sort of thing, not a spouse. You can't pay a spouse. You can't enter into a care contract with the spouse, but you can with a child or somebody else in your family, a grandchild. So that's something I'm so glad I brought up, because I didn't want to forget to tell you. Let me kind of go over some common mistakes that are made unintentionally, like this lady who lived with her mom for 5 years before she passed away. She was in there as a caregiver, right? She should have gotten paid. Yeah, that's the thing. So Medicaid has a new rule that a lot of times, because you moved in and mom will say, oh, I gave her, I'm living with her now or whatever. I don't really pay room and board, but I gave her $5,000 to put on the new porch because, for God's sakes, I don't pay any rent, I don't pay for my groceries, whatever. That's a transfer of assets for less than fair market value for Medicaid's purposes. So as a caregiver, living in the home or stopping by every day to take care of your parents or whatever you're doing, I can do multiple caregiving agreements for multiple kids in the family. You should be documenting it, because any transfer of $500 or more, the state of Illinois is picking it apart, and they're going to penalize your loved one for paying that out to your family. Or, well, God, she takes me on my doctor's appointments every month. They wanted to give her $250. Maybe $250 won't blow the bank, but they're looking at they were at $1,000, now they're starting to pick down to $500. Any transfer over $500, and they will ask you for the last 5 years of bank statements, because Medicaid goes back 5 years. VA is getting ready to institute a 3-year look back. They're asking for 5 years of bank statements, 5 years of IRA statements, 5 years of CD statements, whatever it is for the last 5 years that you've opened, closed, transferred, any of that. You have to produce it, or they won't even let you in on the program. So you either play by their rules or you don't. It is overwhelming and exhausting. Yes?
I'm a little confused about this fair market thing.
Okay.
Maybe I'm thinking of it backwards.
No.
I take my mother-in-law to all of her doctor appointments. In fact, that was one of the questions I wrote on a card. I've read a couple of times now. It says, if you're driving your family member to doctor, make sure you keep track of the mileage so you can take it off of your taxes.
That's a tax
and I
question.
thought that I couldn't take it off of my taxes unless she was my dependent, and she's not. But if I take her there and she's not paying me anything, like she would have to pay a taxi or whatever, is she in trouble because she's not paying me anything?
No, she's not in trouble. But where families get in trouble is they go ahead and just give their loved one $1,000 or whatever for like all the work they do over the last several months. Medicaid will look at that and say that that's a transfer for less than fair market value unless you have a formal care agreement in place with them. And you cannot go back. I've had families come in and say, well, I've been doing this for 5 years. What? Okay, if we're trying to get mom's money, you know, like she's got $60,000, we need to prepay a burial and we need to get her into the nursing home. Can I get back pay? They won't allow you to go back. You have to do a care contract from today forward commensurate with your services, just like if we were to pay any of the in-home, you know, Home Instead, Visiting Angels, all of those places, St. John's, whatever. If you were to pay them to come into your home hourly, you do a contract with them. They bill you every 2 weeks or every month, so it's commensurate with the services provided. So as far as the mileage, I would absolutely ask your accountant that question if you can take that because you're not getting paid. She's not putting gas in your tank or whatever. But the care contract, people get really hung up on that because they've given their family members money and then the Medicaid will ding them later because there wasn't a formal care agreement. But if you do a formal care agreement, it's income to you. So then everybody goes, oh, my tax brackets. Well, it's better than nothing, right? At least you're getting paid for that time off or that time. Most kids are going to say, I want to do it. It's my mom or my dad or my aunt or uncle. What? They're going to do it to do it. But sometimes it's a good technique for Medicaid because if not, the money is going to go to the nursing home and you have legitimately put those hours in. So you pay a little extra tax. It's not the end of the world, but at least you're like treated like an independent contractor. But people kind of get hung up on that one. Or their accountants tell them, so I'm trying to think of some Medicaid tips. Oh yeah, you can gift over the $10,000. It's now $14,000 a year, but that was the general number that everybody remembered. You can gift up to $10,000. It's okay for taxes. It's not okay for Medicaid. It's over that $500 or $1,000 mark, they're going to treat that as a transfer for less than fair market value. If you gift your house away, if you put a life estate on your house, you got to get through the next 5 years. A life estate still has value for Medicaid. So know that. You made it through without putting her in a nursing home. So at some point, the siblings should be just grateful as all get out that there's still a house and something to split. Because had you put her in a nursing home 5 years ago, the house would be gone, right? So that's a catch-22. Yeah. So, you know, just know that there's some Medicaid tips and tricks out there that you have to be careful of. And you don't purposefully transfer those funds or do those things out of spite or trying to stick it to Medicaid so that your mom can get. Most people don't know that you all are trying to avoid hitting the skilled nursing stage or assisted living stage. And what I find with all of my caregivers is when they come in, we're past assisted living. You're taking such good care of them and you've kept them at home so long. When you go from point A to point Z. Because, you know, you go from keeping them at home, there's no assisted living or independent living because you've kept them through that tough phase. And then you get to the point where you can no longer care for them. And that is okay. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to turn to all of these great services because that is what they're there for. You are definitely not alone. Absolutely. Yes?
I'm not sure about that Medicaid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It seems too complicated on getting into your personal assets and things.
Right. Yeah, they'll get into your personal assets. You have to disclose everything. And they're running it in the federal and state tax systems. So they find stuff sometimes we don't know about.
Well, I heard that there's a place called Doors.
Doors? Mm-hmm, that's for...
Is that a good program to maybe get into?
Doors is an Illinois
Medicare?
agency, Department of Rehabilitative Services. I don't know if it's called Doors anymore. Is it? Is it still Doors? They change their name sometimes. But that's just another community, state service that perhaps may provide certain types of benefits or services to your loved one depending on their disability. You can look into it. I don't necessarily...
You have to be, I think I'm right, you have to be Medicaid, have spent down to Medicaid levels in order to be eligible.
I think so too. Yeah.
Have spent down to Medicaid eligible levels to be eligible for services through Doors, and it's typically for people who are disabled who are under the age of 60. So if your loved one is 60 or older, you probably don't want to go to Doors. You want to go to the community care program, and in our area, you access that through the Southwest Illinois Visiting Nurse Association. There's information in your bag on that, the community care program. Under then Division of Rehab is where you would start, and if you don't have that information, ask us.
It's not the big agency we all usually typically think of. That's why you're kind of throwing us for a loop. Do you have a question? If they're paying the cost?
Yeah.
Like daughter's paying to bring mom to adult daycare and she's paying it out of pocket? That's a great question. I don't know. That's a tax accountant question. But you know what? I feel like maybe they can. Because she's incurring, well, I guess it depends on the whole dependent status. And is mom living at home with daughter, or is she just picking mom up every morning? I don't know. That's a tax question. But don't be afraid to ask your accountant those questions. But when they say it's okay to gift money, it is okay, but it's not okay for Medicaid and VA. So know that sometimes you get this good advice. It's just a sticky wicket when we're thinking of long-term care and how to pay for those things. Yes? They're getting ready to cut me off. A single person, $2,000 or less.
So if they're getting Social Security, a small pension, but then they have to pay for Medicare and
that comes out.
Your supplemental
Yep.
insurance and your supplemental drug coverage.
Yep.
Does all that come off?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Great question. So, and if you're in a nursing home and you're eligible for Medicaid, all of those expenses, don't stop your supplemental health insurance. It may overwhelm you. Get with a SHIP counselor. Get somebody to review your supplemental health insurance. Don't stop paying your premiums for supplemental or long-term care insurance. Get with somebody who can give you an analysis before you stop that. It made me think of it. Even when people go into nursing homes on Medicaid, they say, oh, well, it's like, no, because Medicaid isn't covering all the drugs. They're not covering all the services. They've reduced the services they do cover, so your supplemental health insurance may save your life, you know? SHIP. Oh, what's SHIP? Sorry. Senior Health Insurance Provider? Program. Oh, I just know what SHIP is. But they are individuals who can look up your Social Security number and just dial in and drill down into what your benefits are and help you do a great analysis on, Medicare and Age Smart, Southwest VNA, you guys have SHIP counselors, St. John's does. You guys are sitting in the middle of some serious information. You just need to tap your resources. Thank you.